Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Abundant Wellness Podcast. In today's episode, we are going to be talking all about what a dysregulated nervous system actually looks like. So, why meltdowns, food refusal, anxiety, and shutdown is not what most people think it is, especially when it comes to our kids. So, what if the behaviors everyone keeps telling you to fix are actually signs that your child's nervous system is overwhelmed or inflamed? If we think about it that way, it actually completely flips how we parent our children and what kind of help we actually ask for. So many parents feel like they're doing something wrong. You've tried consequences, you've tried reward charts, you've tried stricter discipline, you've tried maybe many, many different types of therapy, and yet things still escalate. So today we're going to be talking all about what a dysregulated nervous system actually looks like in children, because it often does not look like what people expect, and it certainly does not look like what a dysregulated nervous system looks like in an adult. So let's talk about first what the nervous system is actually doing. So your child's nervous system job is actually not behavior. Behavior is a higher executive function skill that requires higher level brain thinking. The nervous system's primary job is to keep your child safe at all times. It is survival. So the brain is constantly asking, am I safe right now? When the brain perceives danger, it shifts into protective states. There are four main protective states, which I go into much more detail on in the Thriving Together community. If you're not in there yet, make sure to click the link in the show notes and hop in there because we've got lots of trainings on what each of these states are specifically. But when the brain perceives danger, it shifts into those protective states. So fight, flight, freeze, collapse, or shut down. For so many of our neurodivergent children, the nervous system detects danger more quickly, stays activated for longer, and struggles to return to regulation. Your child's behavior is often their nervous system's way of trying to survive something that their brain interprets as unsafe. Now, if you haven't already, I want to invite you to go back to listen to the episode with Dr. Kathy Cantwell, where we talk in quite a bit more detail about how the nervous system develops and what these kind of behaviors look like in children, because that does provide somewhat of a framework for today's episode. So, dysregulation does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like meltdowns, okay? These are not tantrums. Tantrums are very different than meltdowns. A meltdown is a loss of nervous system control. And this is where a child has lost all of their ability to self-regulate or self-soothe. It is overwhelmed past their own coping capacity, and zero learning is happening in this state. So, what a meltdown might look like is screaming, hitting, crying uncontrollably, throwing objects, panic, or rage. Okay, that's very different than a tantrum. I want you to remember that when a child is melting down, their thinking brain is not accessible. It's not accessible to them, and it's certainly not going to be accessible to you. The second thing that can actually be a pretty significant sign of nervous system dysregulation is food refusal or picky eating. This is a huge one for many of the families that I work with, and it's very often connected to sensory overwhelm, GI discomfort, or nervous system that feels like it's in threat. So, some possible reasons why a child might be experiencing food refusal. Textures don't just, it's not just about taste or how something feels in their mouth. That actually can very much overwhelm the nervous system of a child that's already living in a pretty significant, constant state of fight or flight. Then we've got nausea or gut inflammation that can happen from infections, bacterial overgrowths, parasite overgrowths, or candida, in addition to just, being chronically stressed. Some other reasons why there's food refusal is pressure around food choices. So if they are feeling pressured, if they're feeling overly observed, a lot of kids will develop some food refusal. And really, a lot of this, can come back down to a nervous system that is stuck in fight or flight. So when the nervous system is activated, digestion actually slows down. And when that nervous system is activated, you might find that your child is much more picky than they normally are. They have a lot harder time being flexible if the quote unquote right food choices are not offered to them. It can be a very, very stressful situation for them. Then, another very common sign of nervous system dysregulation in children is anxiety. But anxiety in children does not often look like it looks in adults. So, that anxiety can look like constant reassurance seeking. So, they're constantly seeking reassurance of something. They have difficulty leaving your side or letting you leave them. They experience fear or anxiety about new situations. And again, that may not be expressed as I feel anxious. It may simply be, I don't want to go. I don't like this. And oftentimes there's tummy complaints in that as well, because again, that gut brain axis is very deeply connected. Rigid routines, so the inability to change a routine or tolerate when a routine is changed on them. There's often a refusal to try new things. Whether that can be, that's food, places, people, things, any of those things can be a cause of anxiety, panic before school or activities. That is a very common sign of anxiety in children. So many anxious children are actually living in that chronic nervous system hypervigilance, and that can come from a lot of the reasons we talked about in the episode with Dr. Kathy, where depending on the child's nervous system development, what their pregnancy was like, what their birth was it a stressful delivery? How early did they walk? Did they have, a lot of stressors in their early life? And those can be environmental stressors and emotional stressors. It's not always just emotional stressors, but that absolutely can be a common one. So many anxious kids are actually living in that chronic nervous system hypervigilance. Then there's shutdown, and this one is often very, very misunderstood by parents. And that is that dorsal vagal shutdown, which I've got quite a few videos on that in the Thriving Together community on the school app, which again, if you're not in there, make sure to click the link in the show notes because I explain this in a lot more detail with a lot more visuals for you to understand what's actually happening in the brain. Okay. This often looks like withdrawal, refusal to talk, hiding, running away, blank staring, and inability to respond. Parents often hear or feel like they're being ignored by their child, but really what biologically is happening is that can be a nervous system that is in freeze or collapse. And often, one of the best things to do for a child in this situation is to communicate to them, hey, it looks like you might need some space. I want you to know that I'm right here in the next room if you need me. Um, Communicating that support and kind of guided presence can actually be extremely stabilizing to a nervous system that feels stuck. On the kind of extreme end of dysregulation, we see this a lot with kids that are on the autism spectrum or have pathological demand avoidance or persistent drive for autonomy. These kids often have difficulty leaving their rooms for, days, weeks, months at a time. They might require for, a short period of time, needing help with activities they didn't need help with previously, like getting dressed for school, getting, meals prepared for them instead of making them themselves. That is a child that is in shutdown, and that means that their nervous system is very, very overwhelmed. Okay. So, why do neurodivergent kids experience this more than neurotypical kids? This really simply does come down to brain wiring differences. Some of this is genetically passed down in what we would consider a or phenotype, which is a specific type of brain wiring, where they have heightened sensory processing, a slower processing speed, or difficulty shifting between nervous system states because their nervous system tends to get stuck. And then we have nervous system sensitivity. So many of these kids have higher baseline stress activation, meaning that on a daily basis, where you or I might start at 0 in terms of stress and go to 50, they're starting out at 50 and going to 100 when they're extra activated. They also have difficulty returning back to a state of calm, and their calm state tends to not be as calm or regulated as somebody with a neurotypical nervous system. Then we have physiologic stressors. So, things that can increase nervous system stress that come from the outside or even the inside from, an organ level. We've got gut inflammation, we have bacterial dysbiosis, so that's where we might experience parasite overgrowth, candida overgrowth, fungal overgrowth, etc., bacterial, that can absolutely put physiologic stress on the nervous system. And not only that, not only does the inflammation itself put stress on the nervous system, but it actually, for most of the kids that I work with, we see bacterial overgrowth, and those bacteria are actually competing for neurotransmitters in the brain. And so the child may actually not be making the dopamine and serotonin that they need to feel calm and regulated throughout the day. Another common physiologic stressor is those nutrient deficiencies. So, B vitamin deficiencies, zinc, magnesium are all very, very common. Iron is a very common deficiency that leads to those physiologic stressors as well. Blood sugar instability. So, a child that tends to do better when after they've eaten, you notice that their meltdown went away as soon as you fed them. Making sure their blood sugars are stable is a really important part of keeping them feeling good. And then we have again chronic infections. So we see that, the extreme end of that would be something like PANS or PANDAS, which is pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with strep. We now know that with PANS, that can be caused by Lyme or mold as well. Those are huge physiologic burdens on our children and on adults that absolutely affect their nervous system. Another very common physiologic stressor is that poor sleep. So, not getting good, deep quality sleep, which we will have a whole episode on sleep issues at some point, airway issues that contribute to difficulty sleeping that may be contributing to a nervous system that is dysregulated. When the body is inflamed or depleted, the nervous system becomes much more reactive, and has a much lower tolerance for shifting gears when that's needed. Most parenting advice assumes that your child's behavior is a choice that they're making, but a dysregulated nervous system means that your child's behavior is truly just a reflection of what's happening at that current state of the nervous system. So, when a nervous system is overwhelmed, children cannot access logic, reasoning, consequences, or problem solving. So, strategies like lectures, punishments, rewards, etc., often escalate that nervous system because all that the nervous system is trying to communicate to you is please give me a sense of safety. Whatever you have to do, that's all that I need is to feel safe. And then everything else comes from that place of safety. So, what actually helps first? I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, so some of this is probably just going to feel a little bit like repetition. But what that looks like is regulation before expectation. And that comes down to us as the parent first. If we are going to be present at all to help our child self regulate, we have to work at regulating ourselves first. Um, then there comes co-regulation. So once your nervous system is calm, your child can borrow that calm, regulated nervous system that helps theirs to settle. So things like a calm voice. One of the things that I learned in it was a training, oh my gosh, probably like 10 years ago when I was working in pediatric acute care, the PEDS ICU and NICU was called management of aggressive behavior. And this really was more for like if we're dealing with an aggressive or violent parent or even a child that was that was in the hospital with us. And that was you do not match their tone and you do not match their energy. What you want to do is come with a calm, slow voice. You want to have a proximity to them that provides a grounding presence. So that might look like coming closer, getting a little bit lower to the ground, as long as you're not in harm's way when you do that, and talking in a really slow voice. And a lot of times, what I would do is I would kind of narrate back to the child what I'm observing. This actually happened in the neurofeedback clinic this past week where we had a child that was coming in for a brain wrap that had some sensory processing issues. And part of that sensory processing disorder for him was made the mapping process very stressful and difficult, meaning that he had a very hard time sitting with the actual brain mapping cap on his head. And so what I did was, he got very upset and was trying to rip it off. And I calmly sat in front of him and I just said, "This is really hard, isn't it? This is probably the hardest thing you've had to do all week. And I'm asking you to sit here and sit with this silly thing on your head that doesn't feel very good. And that feels really frustrating, doesn't it?" And all of a sudden, he stopped crying. His body got really calm because he knew that I understood him and he, could understand the words that I was saying. And I gave him my hands and I said, "I want you to get all of your anger out on my hands." And I just let him, he just was playing with my gloves and trying to take my gloves off. And we were able to finish the brain map recording because I was able to get him into a calm state. Now, it doesn't always work that way. I'm not always successful. The goal isn't always that the child is calm at the end of the interaction. The goal is always that I am a calm, safe presence for the child that's in front of me. And even if that means removing myself from the situation, okay? So, co regulation, which requires you to be regulated first, and then reducing the nervous system load. When a child is experiencing any of the signs or symptoms that I shared with you before, we need to do less, not more. Okay. So, that looks like optimizing their sleep, it looks like regulating their sensory input. A lot of kids in states like this can very much benefit from like deep pressure. So, a weighted blanket that they can sit under, a trampoline that they can go jump on, a swing that they can spin around on. Like, look at what their body craves. What do they naturally gravitate towards when they are dysregulated? And offer that. Offer that as a sensory snack for them. And see if that just helps them to naturally move out of that state. Anger and anxiety are very energizing nervous system states. And so if you think of an energizing experience, a lot of times that requires that we need to move. And so like physically move the body. Um, so looking at that sleep, sensory input, where are they getting overstimulated? Do they need a break between school and any other activities? Make sure that that's provided for them. And then look at, are there any areas where their schedule is pressured? Look at the times that they're having tantrums or meltdowns. And see if there's anything that you can do to build in less pressure, during those times that allow for them to decompress. And when we're looking a little bit, those are all things that we can do for ourselves to stay regulated, but also to reduce that nervous system load in your child. But then there's kind of the deeper work, which is supporting their physiology so that their brain and their body have the nutrients that they need to function optimally. I can't think of a single child that I've ever dealt with either an autism diagnosis, ADHD, anxiety, oppositional defiance disorder that did not have significant levels of inflammation in their body, gut health issues, so bacterial overgrowths. They were missing, they were not absorbing nutrients so therefore those nutrients weren't getting into the brain. There was blood sugar instability. And really, what that boils down to is that a regulated body makes regulation possible, but that starts from the inside out. We have to make sure that their body does have those nutrient building blocks that it needs in order to feel its best. Okay. So, what we want to shift from is we want to shift the focus from we have to make the behavior stop because I'm distressed by it, which is totally valid, to what does the nervous system need and how can I change things around to meet that nervous system need? And if you're unsure of what that is, make sure that you're asking somebody that can help you, that has some expertise in this area. Again, that's part of the reason why we have the Thriving Together community where you can ask for that expert support in our community chat. But make sure if you don't know what that nervous system need is, that you are reaching out for appropriate support for yourself as well, so that you can help your child to navigate that. So if your child has meltdowns, anxiety, food refusal, or shutdowns, it does not mean that you are failing as a parent. Many of these kids are incredibly sensitive. They feel things very deeply. They process the world and their information and the environment around them completely differently. And what we need is nervous system smart support. They need understanding and they need safety. And so you're doing the hard work now by listening to those that have gone before you and really do understand your child. So, if you want to go deeper into how the body and nervous system interact, especially things like gut health, inflammation, and anxiety, share a lot more about that inside the Thriving Together community, where there's tons of free videos and resources that are available to you. So, I hope this helped you today. Make sure to share it with a friend, and we'll be in touch.